Right, we've seen the setting, the sort of the scene to begin with. What we want to do now is start looking forward a little bit in terms of what are the challenges and the opportunities. So, about 85% of homes now have access to gigabit capable broadband in the UK, and oddly the demand is still quite low. So, but we're in a position where we've got over 100 independent fibre operators with code powers in a market that might support 10 perhaps. The money's run out. Other than that, it's looking good, isn't it? So perhaps the job is kind of going back to the 1990s, is let's consolidate, sort the industry out, and game over. Ben's looking slightly demoralised already. But we have a different panel. So first of all, just introduce yourselves. We'll start with Ben, and then it's whatever order this lot comes up in. So
great stuff. Good afternoon. My name is Ben Allwright, and I'm the Chief Executive and founder of Oggy. Oggy is a Welsh telecommunications company, mainly operating in the south of Wales, from sort of Monmouthshire in the east to Pembrokeshire in the west of Wales.
Hi, I'm Mike Surrey. I'm a sector advisor and investor, but I hasten to point out, not a banker, before James takes a dislike to me. I've been involved in numerous rural broadband companies. I'm here today in the context of Amcom, which is a rural ISP in the northeast.
Good afternoon. I'm Clément Le Sur, the Managing Director of Telenco UK. Telenco UK is a company providing end-to-end solutions from the exchange to the end customer.
Hello, I am Tom Rigg. I am the CEO of Broadband for the Rural North, or BARN for short, and we've been in the sector since 2012, solving the problem of deep rural broadband.
Hello, I'm Michael Lee. I'm Chief Strategy Officer and a Director at BARN.
any questions or heckles to start off with? It's all welcome. No? Okay. Let's hear who's first. Mike.
Okay.
I'll take
Oh dear, and the pen. So the background to Amcom is it started as a computer games shop called Alnwick Computerware. Some of you will be familiar with Alnwick, home of Harry Potter. If you're into fly fishing, Hardy's do the best rods available apparently. And like many of these companies, it went through an evolution over 40 years. The current owners, Stephen and Dawn Pynchon, got involved 20 years ago thinking they're going to play computer games, ended up doing business IT support, then there was a need for connectivity, then they became a WISP, then they got into fibre, which is when we got involved. In terms of geography, that's the old WISP network that covered Northumberland and County Durham. But these days we focus very much on Northumberland, so sort of north of Hadrian's Wall, south of the Scottish border. I think listening to sort of the chat earlier, there are a lot of common themes on rural broadband companies, and we've been to many of these conferences and we all have the same challenges. What I tend to pull out is we've tackled it a different way, and the key element of that is partnerships. So we heard earlier from Alex about the challenge of backhaul in rural networks. We don't have any backhaul. We're an access network. We end at the green cabinet. What we do have is a partner in the shape of Comsworld, who do have a backhaul network. We had a tripartite arrangement with iNorthumberland, Comsworld and ourselves to build out a backhaul network. So it links together all the council buildings funded by the council. We built it, Comsworld operate it. So as well as being a capital efficient way of doing it, it also means, if you like, we've outsourced a huge chunk of our kind of tech. So we've got an access network, we've got IP addresses, everything else we draw as a fuzzy cloud on a slide and leave Charlotte Comsworld to sort out. Another key partnership for us is Northumberland Estates. They are obviously a huge local landowner and an investor in the company, and they have a social agenda as well, in that they're looking to invest in Northumberland. Between the Lord and the Earl, they own about 20% of the company. They give us a master way leave for all their land. they're phenomenally useful for opening doors in the local area. I come from a company called Railsite Telecom. You might think you're at the wrong conference. We're not going to talk about Wi-Fi on trains here. But we ended up in Northumberland. I'm clearly not from Northumberland. Building some masts up there for the Department of Transport as a trial. And when you put mobile masts up, you think, well, you might as well add a WISP on the side. And then we realised, well, there's already a WISP there. So it makes more sense to collaborate rather than compete. So we've come into Amcom both as an investor. We own about 40% of the company, but also sort of, if you like, a strategic telecoms advisor, because our background, most of us have worked in mobile or fixed over the decades. We bring a lot, if you like, of industry knowledge. Amcom bring phenomenal local knowledge and connections. And I've also got there IQ Geo as a small company. If I'm honest, not all the vendors support you all the time. These guys have been us on the journey the whole way, and getting the right planning software to plan your network to suit for your business makes a huge difference. And clearly, BD UK, we're a demand-led company. We do vouchers. We don't do gigabit contracts. They are have their own challenges, shall we say? But hugely right on BD UK for the voucher programs. So we've been building fibre for 4 years. We've always had the same aspiration. We think there's 50,000 rural homes in Northumberland which need to be connected. They vary from some which are quite easy, because places like Alnwick, Amble, they're market towns, to some which are incredibly hard. So on the BD UK website, you'll see a case study for Ingram Valley Safaris, classic farm in the middle of nowhere with no connectivity. They cannot run their business. So we literally do the whole thing, from the relatively easy to the incredibly hard. In terms of numbers, because we're demand led, the thing we really focus on is customers. I mentioned earlier our fixed wireless customer base has stayed very stable. I'm sure that will fall off at some point. At the moment we're at 5,000 fibre customers, so those good at maths can work out we've got about a 33% take up. Actually last year we had a 42% take up, and so far this year we've acquired more customers than properties RFS. And for us, it's not about being the biggest network, it's about having the most densely built and most highest level of customer or market share. One thing that's really important to us is agility, and we've made a conscious decision, and a number of people who've built networks end up going this way. Trying to build rural networks through contractors brings a whole series of contractual challenges. The reason being it's harder to understand the risks. So we find from a risk management and agility point of view, it's best to have your own in-house build team. We've got the ditch witches, we've got the mole plough, we've got the pickups. Yeah, we were mentioning storm response earlier. For us, storm response is easy. We've got pickup trucks. There's the Polaris on the slide there. We've got chainsaws. Trees don't get in our way. We go and get the network back up and running. And I hasten to add in a health and safety manner as well, in case you've got visions of people just sort of, careering around Northumberland with chainsaws. But we've found that it's the easiest and cheapest way to overcome the issues in the rural network. The flip side is we've got about 40 vehicles and 50 operational staff. It does just limit the amount of scale and scope you can tackle at any one period in time. The other thing is the vehicles are our best advertising. I'm not a marketeer by background, I'm an accountant. But one of the things I've learned is if you run a broadband company, have a really distinctive livery. It doesn't matter how horrible it is, you just want to be remembered. And you'll see I've got a bit of orange behind me on the chart up there showing my previous company. We have black and red, and everybody says we just see your vehicles everywhere around Alnwick and surrounding areas. We view ourselves as a sort of a trusted challenger brand. So one thing which is really important to us is fair and transparent pricing. We mainly sell at £25 or £30 all day long. We have competition from copper in the market towns. The incumbents come and do annoying things like discount down to 25, 23, 22 quid. We have to compete. But whatever we do is always offered to both new and existing customers. We've got this kind of what I think is quite a nice kind of style of ad which goes out. We're very localised. Every time we go to a town, we create one of these for each town. And in Northumberland, it's a pretty consistent story of history. There was the Norman Conquest. Somebody built a castle. Lord Percy turned up. A few other events happened, and then your life was transformed with Alcon Broadband. And the locals love it all day long. When are we getting one for Warkworth, they say. But that point about honest, transparent, fair pricing, no rises in contract, all of that we see is really important. We try and avoid discounting as far as we can, but there are times when next fibre turn up and do a deal, so we've got no choice but to compete. On the left is our latest campaign. What's a duck got to do with fibre? So we, as you would expect, spend a lot of time out in the village halls doing digital inclusion. People love our merchandise. I don't know why. And we do a lot of water bottles and tote bags and baseball caps and so on. And a child came up to us and said, "Do you do an Alcon duck?" Now, we don't like to miss a challenge, so we did. And suddenly the entire community embraced these ducks. There's a social media campaign going on up there about where have you taken your Alcon duck. Best one so far is a champagne bucket in Barbados, and it wasn't the management. But I think the thing which is really, really important, we heard some of it earlier, is about supporting the local community, and it's been part of the local community. And what I really believe is ultimately, for any broadband company to succeed, you've got to be really well focused on customer service, and you've got to have a really well respected brand. And then that sits behind that, you've got to have the right technology, people, service, billing system, and all those kind of good things. Our main way of communicating with our customers is actually Facebook. For our demographic, Facebook appears to be the sort of social media of choice. We are on the other platforms. On the left is something we do every year. We always go and support the local food bank. We load up our vehicles, we buy all the stuff from supermarkets, take it down there, encourage other local businesses to do the same, because in all rural areas there is a lot of poverty out there. On the right is another example from Facebook. There's a local market in Alnwick, not surprisingly. It's a market town. And the local mobile phone masts went down, and the traders all rely on chip and pin to do their sales these days. So we just went down there and spun up a Wi-Fi network that morning, gave all the traders access free of charge, and you can do that when you've got your own in-house service team. And they were grateful to us forever for saving the day. And we get a real thing going. You'll see it on social media wherever you live. People will say, "I'm fed up with my broadband provider. Where should I go?" I live in Stratford-upon-Avon. Quite a few people recommend Lit Fibre, but there's a whole range. If you look on a social media post in Alnwick and somebody says, "I want a broadband provider," 9 out of 10 answers will be Alcon all day long. And at the end of the day, the involvement in the community, the support we get from them, the service we offer is what delivers the customer numbers we achieve. Right, I'm being chased off, aren't I? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I lived in Northumberland for 13 years. I wish you'd been there when I was there. There you go. Ben.
Thank you. Next. So just a little bit about Oggy and what we do. So we're a full service telco provider. So that means we're not just focused on the sort of the rural and underserved communities. So that was a big draw for us into Wales. Wales is typically a very underserved place, typically quite a poor place. That's not universally so. The demographics vary wildly. If you go to the eastern parts of Monmouthshire, it's actually quite wealthy. But if you start to go into the valleys and you start to go into Pembrokeshire, you see a lot of poverty as well. But what we wanted to do in Wales was bring an alternative telecom provider. For much of Wales, outside of the major cities where you might find Virgin, Openreach was the only provider. And we wanted to bring products and services that not only tapped into the residential need and the need for faster broadband, better broadband connectivity, but also served that growing business market too, recognising that a lot of the commerce and a lot of the businesses in Wales are actually in those rural communities. So we're a homegrown Welsh challenger brand. We're based in Wales. We employ largely in Wales. I think probably 90% of our staff are Welsh, and although we outsource the construction to third parties, a lot of those are Welsh construction companies, we insource things like installs. So we really do employ and work in the communities that we served. We're backed by Infra Capital, so you may have heard of them. They sit also behind GigaClear, fairly large rural Welsh provider in central England, Fibrous in Northern Ireland, White Fibre on the Isle of Wight, and also Neos, the former SSE Telecom, so they back all of them. So we're backed by a really good investor that's got a lot of experience in this space, and we're also more recently backed by Cardiff Capital Region. That's a Welsh fund, basically, the collection of 10 local authorities that have raised funds to invest in various projects, and they now have lent to Oggy. And for us, from day one, the number one priority was to build a Welsh brand, to build a Welsh offering that put customer experience at the very heart of what we did. I mean, ultimately, anybody can roll out networks. There's plenty of networks around. Lots of people could have come and will come into Wales to build networks. But how do we stand out from the crowd? How do we do something different? And putting that customer experience at the forefront. When you look at the competition, when you look at the Virgins, and you look at the Skies, and you look at the BTs, a lot of them have a pretty poor rating on Trustpilot, pretty poor recognition in terms of their customer experience. And we wanted to make that at the heart of what we did from day one. So like I say, we targeted initially the underserved areas. When we looked around Wales, so much of it was at the bottom of everybody's list. It was at the bottom of Openreach's list. Communities that were looking at 3, 4, 5 years until they were going to get any kind of fibre provision. Although a lot of communities had super fast fibre, which we all know not to be fibre, ultimately they were many were labouring around the sort of 20 to 40 megabits of provision. And of course, we started the company during COVID, so the utility of fibre and good broadband was going through the roof. So saw an opportunity to bring those the sort of fibre products to those communities as a first mover. And in many communities, we are still the first mover of fibre in those areas and the only provider. We wanted to be different from other operators as well. We wanted a whole town ethos. We didn't want to go into areas and sort of cherry pick. We wanted to take a town and deliver to the whole town. And typically what we've been finding is that about 70% of the town we can cover with PIA, so it's a combination of overhead and underground, and that meant we had to do about 30% dig in town. But like someone said earlier, actually many of these communities, once you get into them, whether they're post-industrial communities like mining communities or market towns, they're not that dissimilar from other urban larger towns in terms of density. The big challenge is getting to them. So actually our cost per premise hasn't been crazy high. But where it has been more challenging, we have used the BD UK vouchers tactically to help us fill in and really get that 100% coverage into the towns we've gone into. Technically, we've used XGS PON. That's given us real flexibility between the sort of 1-2 gig offerings around residential, but also allowing us to go up to 10 gig for the business services and business products as well. Like I say, the biggest challenge in Wales is backhaul. If you look at the geography of South Wales, I mean, Monmouthshire is incredibly far away from Pembrokeshire. So actually backhaul was something that really dictated our methodology from day one. So we use an active cabinet. We typically place those in a sort of a larger town near to an Openreach exchange. It allows us to access the DFX product, very cost-effective way of getting backhaul to those areas. And then we feed out basically in a passive-only network from those active cabinets to cover about 10,000, 15,000 premises from one cabinet. To answer a point earlier, it's very modular. You can put in more cards, fewer cards, so actually we find it quite cost effective, as long as we've only got one cabinet serving quite a large area, and then we just put in the cards and put in the SOPs as we go. So it's quite an incremental cost there. We have also, we won a Welsh Government concession, so Oggy is able to place our plant using existing apparatus along the side of the major roads in Wales, so alongside the M4 for instance, but a lot of the major trunk roads where there's existing ducts, whether it's for CCTV or traffic monitoring, whatever, we've been able to access that. And we actually recently finished a build that goes from Cardiff via Newport, which has one of the largest data centres in Europe called Vantage, and then across the Prince of Wales Bridge into England. So we also have a wholesale aspect to our businesses along with the residential and the business services that we offer too. To pick up some of the points made earlier, I couldn't agree more that when you're building a company from the bottom up, it is about building that advocacy at the local level. It is essential to root yourself in these communities and do as much good as you can possibly do in these communities to become part of the fabric of these communities. So whether it's getting involved in restorations, the local rugby club, whether it's getting involved in charity raising, whether it's getting involved in the Abergavenny Food Festival, which we sponsor, the Porthcawl 10K, which we sponsor, the Blackwood Rugby Club. All of these things are part of building trust, building reputation, doing good, creating social value, social cohesion. I mean, many of these towns have really suffered over the years. Yeah, there's been a brain drain. A lot of people have left these communities, gone to work in Cardiff, Swansea, etc., moved. But by providing our services, communities, we help to help people to stay and work from home more, but then help them to rebuild the fabric of those communities to make them prosper. I think a lot of people talked about the lack of interest in broadband, the lack of take-up. I mean, I disagree. Oggie's seeing already about 20%, and we had about 1% take-up a month. So that's about 850 to 900 new customers join us every month. So if we're at 20% take-up now, I can pretty confidently say we'll be at 30% by the end of the year take-up across our builds. We already have 30% across many of our older cohorts. So look, it takes time. There are plenty of reasons why people don't switch instantly just because you bring along a superior product at a better price. And there's lots of switching apathy out there. The classic 5 obstacles really that you have to overcome in terms of making a sale. But the demand is there, and the demand is only growing. So, we reckon we'll be at 30% by the end of the year, and we're targeting about 40%. And the reason we're targeting about 40% is we also recognise that Openreach will overbuild us everywhere. Probably there'll be 1 or 2 other altnets like there already are, like Not Omnia have built in some of our areas. And we will share the market to some degree. There's a huge amount of marketing power between, sort of talk, and many of the other ISPs like Vodafone who operate over the Openreach network alone. And, it's very, very difficult to compete with that. But ultimately, if you are offering a superior product at a great price and fantastic customer service, throw in the fact that we're Welsh and we're doing a lot of great good in these communities, we think a 40% take-up overall is a totally reasonable target for us. As I said, we've got a business arm as well. We really don't see the difference. I mean, ultimately, if you're going to serve these communities, these are residences, these are micro businesses, these are small high streets, but there's lots of other businesses being built in these places too. And the Welsh Government are very keen to grow and invest in some of the biggest growing sectors that are coming to Wales. So whether it be fintech, whether it be AI, whether it be some of the media clusters, semiconductor clusters, a lot of these things are growing really, really fast in Wales. In fact, outside of London, Wales is one of the biggest tech growth areas. So it's about making sure that we've got all of the services and products that we need to serve what's going on and what's growing in Wales. So we very much came out of this with wanting to offer, a full suite of products and services. And just to see, I guess, some of the impacts. I mean, it's not just Oggie, of course, but back in 2021, we were staring at a landscape where only 20% of Wales had access to full fibre. Now it's 66%. And I think in no small part due to the altnets across the UK basically galvanising the likes of Openreach and Virgin Media into actually doing something. There was obviously their networks were a bit of a cash cow. What was really going to motivate them to invest all that money to charge pretty much the same money for an alternative service? So I think that the work that's been done in the altnet community and the fibre internet community has only been good news for the UK. But the fact is there is still a lot to do. So when people say it's done, let's just consolidate, our work is done. I couldn't disagree more. There's still lots more to do. Fibre isn't the only answer. I do agree there's a role for satellite, there's a role for Wi-Fi. There will be edge technologies that fill in the gaps, but ultimately we have to push fibre as far as we can take it. The fact is it's a difficult investment landscape at the moment, and while we shake out those companies that will fail and shake out some of the early consolidation, I think there are lots of strong companies out there. I think those operators that are vertically integrated, that really care about the communities they're in, that put the customer first, that build a strong ASP with strong levels of trust can achieve an awful lot. And there's no real compulsion, therefore, for us to start to consolidate earlier and water down our efforts in the communities in which we serve. So that's certainly my feelings on the topic. And just in terms of, just recognising just how far this grows. I mean, yes, 20 meg seemed like enough not so long ago, 50 meg, now 100 meg still seems actually quite a lot. Why are we selling half a gig or a gig? The demand is just coming, right? The data consumption only grows, the applications only grow. There's no doubt in my mind that pretty soon half a gig will seem paltry and everybody will want a gig. So, the technology's right, the longevity of the technology is there. It's a great investment, it's got a great future. So, that's Oggie. Thank you.
Any questions or issues so far?
Right, we're going to do this as a little bit of a geo, but I mean, before I start, it's a case of there's a common theme here, isn't there, which I'm sure you will pick up on, and it's whether it's because of the people who have been invited to speak, but what we've got here is a lot of regional altnets who believe that the customer and the communities are first, and there is a lot of that, and those people, they're still building, they're still able to invest and go and put network out there. We can all question how fast the whole industry is going. But yeah, it's good to see. I'm really happy with that. I mean, we started back in 2012, and it was a community that came together to build what is now Broadband for the Rural North. And it was a case of that community coming together saying, copper isn't the solution. What is the incumbent going to do about it, and looking forward into the future thinking, well, that isn't what we really need in the deep rural. What we really need is fibre, so what are we going to do about it? So Barn started, and we've been going quite a reasonable number of years now, and we do have those communities connected. I'll go into the take-up rates in a little bit because it's an interesting statistic on it. But that drives the take-up. If you engage entirely with that community and you educate them on what it is to be digital and how to use the actual service itself, they will come along that journey with you. Anyway, I go off on a tangent, but our mission is to deliver the best internet service in the country to the areas that are hardest to reach, working shoulder to shoulder with and for rural communities, to realise the enduring benefits of greater resilience and connectivity. Bit of a mouthful. There's a lot inside that, because it's not just broadband, and it's recognising with those communities it is not just broadband. That is the start of it, okay? Because actually, once it's in, and there's a lot of effort to get it in, it's absolutely everything that comes after that that really, really counts, okay? So we are owned by our members. We are a community benefit society. Which is a very, very different model of running things. So we have 3,400 members who have all invested their money into the company in order to go and build the broadband. But as I said earlier, it's not just the broadband, it's everything else that comes with it. And they drive us. They drive the directors, they drive the mission. They're a part. We've consciously made them part of the journey and part of the company. So right now, you can see the map. That's currently where we're building. The blue is done. The green is in build. The orange is in development. And of course, there's a lot more beyond that, which I'm not releasing on a public map. But that's you can see there's a lot of contiguous network there. It's communities joining communities. And yes, there are certain gaps where you've got a little bit of a drive. But what we've got is a backhaul network that we have built throughout all of that. We haven't got too many slides here, I'm afraid, but we go from Equinix Manchester all the way up through to Penrith and Carlisle. We go across to Stellium in Newcastle, back down to Leeds, AQL, back into Manchester, and then of course down to Telehouse North in London. And the reason we did all of that, and it's at 400 gig, is because we can see the demand of the consumer, the demand of these communities is only ever going to go up. So right now we're using all of our resources to expand the network, because those people out there who don't have it yet are still on copper lines that are doing 1 megabit. Even if it's in an area that's supposed to be FTTC or whatever it might be, 1 megabit. And they're just, 5G, yeah, okay, it's there. Does it work in the house? No. There's still a lot of challenges in the deep rural of being connected, and I think fibre is the way. Anyway, I'm going to pass to you, Michael, to carry on. Can we do this as a little bit of a cure?
It's the big green button.
Yeah,
is
big
it?
green
there
button.
We go. Look at that. Perfect. So we're a community benefit society, which means we are owned and accountable to our members, but our members are our customers. Our members are in the community. So how does that work, and what does it mean? So really, what it means for us is we have the privilege of being able to invest and to build in a way that invests in a long-term asset for the enduring good of these communities. Because the people who own us, people who keep us accountable, they're not looking for us to make a quick buck. They're not looking for us to build and sell. They want us to serve them for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years into the future. And they want us to build an asset that will transform their communities literally for generations to come. So that fundamental starting point of being a community benefit society then flows through all the sort of business decisions that are taken at the executive and the board level in terms of how we shape our strategy and how we build our network and how we operate as an organisation in this crowded space. So deep rural, we work with deep rural communities that don't have a viable alternative for their gigabit connectivity. We're not here to sort of start competing. We don't want a knife fight in a telephone box. We want to go to the communities that really need us and that wouldn't have a connectivity solution without us. And when we do engage with those communities, we offer a connection to 100% of the properties in those communities. So we don't just take the heart out of the community, we don't just do the easy bits. You know, we have and will go 5 kilometres up a single track road to a farm that doesn't have running water, that doesn't have electricity, but when they fire up their generator, they get 1,000 megabits per second on their full fibre connection. We've done it before and we will keep doing it, because that is the community. And if you want to transform a community, you've got to get to everyone. And it costs more and it takes longer, but you do it once, you do it right, and then you don't have to come back. And we build with the community. The reason we can afford the cost and the reason we can afford the time is we build the network alongside the communities. The community are out on the ground. You know, they're knocking on doors, they're getting the sign up, they're securing the way leads, they are having the conversations for us. The reason I think we've got some of the best penetration in the market is because Barn is a trusted brand, but it is recommended to you by someone you trust. The person knocking on your door is someone you know from the village hall, from the shop, from church, from wherever in your community. And they are saying, we want to make Barn happen, and we trust them, and then it works. And the other point, which I think is really key for us, is to do with the sustainability of the build strategy. As you can see here on the other side of the slide, the way we build is we fund each project on a project by project basis. So we factor in the build cost for that community. We understand how much we think we're going to get in the vouchers and how much we're going to get from grants. And then the community invests the shares so they become members of the society and invest in the shares to cover that build cost. And then once that's secured, we are committed to building to that community, but only that community. And then we go on, and then we go on, and then we go on. So as an organisation, we have the absolute privilege of knowing that we don't have a huge investor sat on our shoulder saying, why is your penetration not higher? Why aren't you building? Why aren't you connecting 4, 5, 6, 700 properties a week or a month? Because that's what your business case says. We have a community that understands we are funded to connect them, and we will keep going until it doesn't make sense anymore to keep going, until there aren't people desperately pulling us into the communities, and then we will stop and we will deliver service over the network and we will return value to the communities.
Okay, and that really leads into the build methodology, because I mentioned earlier today the question about overhead versus underground. And another part of working with these communities is that we can get to know the land, we can get to know the land ownership, and we can get to know all the difficult points about getting a fibre someplace. Because one of the questions around, well, why can't we take a fibre 5 kilometres up a track, is because you've got to cross a river, you've got to cross a road, you've got to go through a triple SSI, you've got to go through and it gets very costly if you want to do that as part of a build model where you don't involve the community. However, if you do, you will find a way. So if you understand the land, you understand what's underneath the ground that might not be on the asset registers that you can see, you can understand where you want to place that fibre all the way up, and it'll snake left and right, up and down. But it'll be a safe path, it'll avoid everything else that's along there, and it won't have cost us in figuring out that route because the community's got involved and they will help us get it there. So that's one part of our build methodology, it will be underground. Now, we have obviously bits and pieces that we've had to go and overhead for some reason, and we do have some wireless links where there's been absolutely no problem, but I can count them on my hand. We have over 15,000 fibres into homes right now, and our take-up rate is 55% on an average. In the earlier communities, that take-up rate is higher because of time. The longer it's been there, the more people move in or understand what they need it, and then they sign up. And the newer areas obviously are less as they launch, but over time, and as Ben has alluded to, those figures will go up because people will understand the brand, they'll understand, moving into an area, this is the thing that they need, and they'll sign up. But the great thing is, it's all subsurface. So one, not really a benefit, is that it's out of the way, nobody sees it. So where do they see your brand? They don't see it in the cables strung up on the poles. They don't see you anywhere. So how do they know about you? Well, if you're ingrained into that, and time's up, if you're ingrained into that community, then that is what sells it, okay, because you'll be understood as a trusted partner in those communities. One final thing before I'm thrown off, XGS PON, isn't it great? We predominantly built a point-to-point network in the early days because it beat GPON. Go back 12 years ago, point-to-point beat GPON, we thought. And now XGS PON has come along and we're adopting it because it reduces the costs, added flexibility, and there's just all sorts of doors that are opened for us now. And I will stop because James is here.
We will get back to the days of Barry Ford and Chris Conda, because Chris Conda once called for me to be flogged in public. We know who's next.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Clément Le Sueur, I'm the Managing Director of Telenco UK. It's probably not very obvious from my name or my accent that I'm actually managing a UK company. But if there are any hard Brexiter in the room, rest assured I shall soon be able to apply for my British citizenship. So I'm actually one of the good ones.
Brexit means Brexit, you know.
So regarding the Telenco Group, it was created more than 25 years ago in France, where we still have our headquarters in Moiran, which is close to Grenoble and Lyon. So if you guys are into skiing, like Mike apparently, you probably know about this region. Or if you are more into wine like Michel, that's also a good region to go to if you want to visit. We have quite a large presence in Europe and also in Africa and South America. The reason is because we were working with a number of operators in those countries, and at some point they wanted us to support them with all the logistics, going through customs, etc., and have a local stock dedicated for them in these different countries. And that's why over the years we developed a number of subsidiaries all over the world. And specifically here in the UK, we actually have 3 different entities today. So Telenco UK, which is based in Swindon, where we have large warehouses. And that's the part in the UK which is really managing the logistics for our customers. So we hold the stock, we do next day delivery, and we work with the different partners and also with the companies manufacturing in the group so that we have a stock here in the UK. Then we have Rainford Solutions, based in St. Helens, which designs and manufactures indoor racks and outdoor cabinets. So if you go in the street and see the green cabinets, that's the type of products which are manufactured by Rainford. And finally, we have SCTE, which is a company providing training and services. So they do training like how to safely climb telegraph poles, how to splice a fiber, how to correctly open a chamber. But they also provide services such as how to be more efficient in the way you do the installation. How could you do more installations in the day? How can you make sure that you do the installation right the first time? And that's really today the type of services that we're working on with our customers, combining the skills and the knowledge of CTTS with the products that we design and manufacture inside the group. And funny enough, usually when I present this slide to customers, obviously there is a lot of information, but usually they ask me at the end 2 questions. First one is, why the heck do you guys are in Réunion Island? Followed very shortly by, can I visit this site? So they don't care at all about where we manufacture the products. They just want to go to Réunion Island. And so the reason, just for your personal knowledge, is because one of the co-founders of Telenco, who traveled like all over the world to develop the business at the beginning, was quite a big fan of the life in Réunion Island, and he managed to negotiate with the other co-founders to create a company over there so that he could go regularly. And that's really the reason why we have an office in Réunion Island. So regarding our activities in general, so historically we've been really focused on fixed telecom networks. So when the company was created, it was really for overhead deployments. So like anchoring clamps to hold the cables, all the metallic part, the metal hardware to hold the clamps. So that's how the company was created. And over the years, we started developing products around that. So the cable, which is actually held by the clamps, the fiber cables, the fiber enclosure, etc. In order today to really provide an end-to-end solution from the telephone exchange to the end customer. And then over the years, what we realized, and that's actually something which has been mentioned by a number of people today, especially when you deploy in rural areas, is that fixed networks is not going to be 100%. At the end, especially when you get close to your customer, you might have a bit of wireless or other type of technologies. And that's why, by working with our customers, we started like creating new offers to be able to support every stage of the deployment of our customers. So from a product point of view, as I mentioned, from fixed networks, we go from the exchange or the street cabinets, so where you will house your active equipment, your OLT. And then we'll have products every step of the way until you get to the end customer, such as yourself or myself, where you have the last patch cord to go to your active equipment. And today, a big part of the focus also that we are working on with our customers is regarding a new activity we started in France, which is regarding the manufacture of composite poles. So in Europe, so Italy were probably are probably the most advanced ones, where today most of their network has been deployed with composite poles. Right now in France, Orange, so the equivalent of BT, decided to replace all their wooden poles in the network by composite poles. There are a number of reasons, but a big one is regarding the impact on the environment, because for wooden poles, you have a number of treatments that you need to do, which potentially can go inside the ground. And in the Northern Ireland, actually, that's one of the topics with the crozet, which is one of the products you use, which might be banned by the end of the decade. And so that's why at the moment we are focusing a lot of our resources on this type of composite poles. Today it's a bit different because in France they don't use pole steps, so they use MUP or platforms to go all the way up to the pole. However, we are currently working at the moment with one national operator in the UK, not to give names, to look at having pole steps on composite poles, so that we can really have exactly the same benefits as the wooden poles currently used in the UK. And just a quick point, so because the map before was really between what we manufacture, our R&D centers, and just distribution, but just from a manufacturing point of view, that was really a wish and the objective of the co-founders of Telenco since the beginning was to manufacture as much as possible in Europe or close to Europe. And that's why today all the main products or components you will find in your network are manufactured in Europe. So in the UK we have reinforced solutions, so we can do indoor racks and street cabinets. But then between France, Portugal and Germany, we can do the connectorization of the cables. I just mentioned in France now a big topic is the manufacture of composite poles. And more recently we opened a new site also in Tunisia, again to work on fiber connectorization. And that's also where we manufacture the spiral clamps, so like curly whirly, or there are different names depending of who you are asking. But yes, today that's the main point for us, is to have also like different sites to manufacture the different products. And that's why, fortunately or unfortunately, during COVID, that was like very big years for Telenco, because we had a number of people who came to us because they couldn't get the products from their usual supplier manufacturing in the Far East. And because we had like at least 2 sites to manufacture most of the products, we were able to absorb this increase in capacity and react to this peak of activity and supply our customers during this period. So if there is one thing you need to remember today regarding Telenco, that would be this slide. So what we can do for you is really from the start is to work on the design. So that can be the design of new products, but also the design of solutions, and help you on how to deploy your fiber network from start to finish. We manufacture the products, as we just mentioned, so we can really help you depending of if you need flexibility, if you need custom-made products. Obviously, because we are manufacturing close to the UK, that's a big topic for us is CSR. So if you have objective on CSR, that's also something we can help you with. We have the logistics, because obviously in the UK we have the warehouses in Swindon to stock all the products you need. And finally, the services to help you improve the way you actually do the installation of the different products that we manufacture. So that's it for me. If you need more information, feel free to go on our website, so .uk to see the products, and there is .com if you want to look at the solutions. Thank you, everyone.
Any questions? Okay, one of the things that sort of struck me from all this, well, there are a few we'll get to, but it's almost what happens about the gaps between the places that we're going to. So, Ben, in terms of Oggy, you were talking about getting to those towns, the sort of rural towns, and then the way you're managing your backhaul network is you're getting backhaul products between them. Now that leaves potentially gaps between those islands of connectivity where you've then got to reach out back into those communities. Now, if I understand right, and this is still the way to do that, the barn model is very much more about kind of like moving on, and so you don't leave those sort of, don't have islands of connectivity surrounded by gaps. Now, one of the things I kind of have to say from this group of operators is they're all right. I mean, often you say, there's definitely things that are right and wrong and whatever. In terms of doing what they do, these are some of the most successful operators in terms of delivering to rural areas. They've all proven that. But it's a case of how do we go from what you've got so far and fill in the other bits? There's that final challenge. Ben, thoughts on that in terms of how you do
I mean, the challenge is, of course, that as you go increasingly rural, it gets increasingly expensive. And the likes of Barn have come up with very innovative ways of getting that kind of coverage, even to those most rural and most difficult places. I mean, the big challenge for us when we're starting out is that you need to build machinery, and you need to create volume, and you need to create consistency in your build engine. So you gravitate towards first those larger communities, ironically in some ways, but you gravitate towards the towns and the large villages because there's volume there, you get consistency in your build, you can get good coverage, and frankly those places are being left behind. But when you go to that next level, when you start looking at the really small villages and then the hyper-rural, it gets increasingly difficult and it gets increasingly expensive. Now, there are a couple of BDUK remedies, right? There's the gigabit voucher scheme, which effectively refunds you at the point of connection, or there's the larger interventions, the type A, Bs and Cs, where effectively you bid for government money to go and build these places. Now, that process is complicated, onerous and expensive. There are different size schemes, from the sort of sub 10,000 to larger, and then even larger still. So you can apply to use those schemes. Many companies have done that very, very successfully. For Cornwall, for instance, that's proved a very successful solution. But it's quite a commitment to want to go and bid for those very large intervention areas. And for Oggy, we found there was enough to do without going after that. But that's the next step, right? And are we the right size, or are BT really, frankly, given that they have all of the infrastructure in place and they're a very large organisation, the most likely provider in a lot of those rural areas to go in and fill those final gaps up until the point where the fibre technology maybe runs out of steam? But that's really the only remedy. They are so inefficient and so cost ineffective to build normally. You're looking at maybe £2,000-3,000 a premise. And unless you want to go in and start charging people £100, £150, £200 a month for broadband, there is no way to make a commercial return, right? So you need the intervention, you need the government money to go and build them. But it is a difficult process to engage with, an expensive process. And you've got to be ready for it. It's a very different model as well of rollout, and your organisation has to change shape a lot to make it work.
That is really interesting. Tom, Michael. Anything to comment on that, Michael?
I'd like to come in, or do you want?
No, you go first, Michael. It's fine.
Yeah, I mean, so you build these properties today either because it's the right thing to do and you're in a position to do what you believe the right thing to do is, or because it's the commercially viable thing to do. And 98% of the market is only doing the second thing, which is why a lot of these properties aren't getting built to. It's that simple. But at some point they will be the commercially viable thing to do, and that'll be for two reasons. One, because the government will have to keep upping and upping the subsidy per property until it gets to a point where they're commercially interesting. And two, hopefully, because as the full fibre networks spread closer and closer to them, that making that final full fibre leap or leap through other technologies gets lower. So the cost to connect it comes down and the subsidy comes up until you hit the sweet spot in the supply and demand curve. But I think the challenge we need to set ourselves as an industry is how do we make sure that that cost does come down? Because there's one thing having full fibre closer and closer, the other is having full fibre that you can access, and not just the company that built it can access, but the marketplace can access in a way that they can use it, and they can use it cost effectively to make that hop. And they know where it is, they know how they're going to pay for it, and they have the technologies that link into that fibre. And as long as we as an industry can make that happen, and the government keeps making that happen, at some point they will meet and they will get connected. But my concern is that cost coming down. Tom, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I think we're in a point of tension here where, the industry is doing its best to use all the technologies available to it to go and connect people. I mean, that's clear, I think, from all of the manufacturers, the supply chain, all of the altnets that are operating. We're considering all the options. We spoke about low Earth orbit today, fixed wireless access, 5G, fibre, all of those things will be used to go and connect everybody. But I think the underlying thing is that fibre must continue to creep constantly until you get to that point where it's done. It's done to the point where there's enough fibre to successfully feed the masts, to successfully feed whatever technology wants to be put on the end of it for your mobile or your fixed wireless access or whatever it is, including, yes, we go the extra mile, putting fibre all the way up to the people on the top of the hillside. That's just a conscious decision of ours to include them all in our builds. In others, it might not make sense to do that, but I think we're just going through that point of tension at the moment, and it's not done yet. We've got a few years yet to go, and I think all we need to do as an industry is come together between the operators, the manufacturers, government, BDUK, and use all the options available to us to just keep pushing. Yeah?
I think, hang on, Paddy. I think that there's some interesting issues there. Ben, you talked about the BDUK process. I know a little bit about the BDUK process, as you know, and even that doesn't push you to do the bits in between, because it says, there's this amount of money, how many premises are you going to bid, and most will bid for the towns and a few bits around the towns, but they will not bid those ones in between because it spoils the economics of it, even for a BDUK bid. So even the BDUK bids, they're not picking up in the way that Barn would, not picking up all those premises. So Pat, you can.
Yeah, so on a similar vein, the BDUK Project Gigabit is offering a lot of these rural areas, 90% of them is the normal requirement for a bid. So is there another intervention that we should be looking at that covers the rest? Because £2,000-3,000 a prem is not financially viable unless you have your specialist model. And your specialist model is exactly that. It's specialist, it's brilliant, but it is in its niche. So is there something else that BDUK should be looking at? Because frankly, if there is something and somebody else is suggesting, they're willing to hear it.
And so before you get into this is I think at the heart of what we need to be doing now. Probably starting more than 10 years ago, of course the Superfast programme was being rolled out in sort of en masse, and I was saying to BDUK, because they were saying, oh, there's fibre to virtually every cabinet in the UK, and I was saying, yeah, and only OpenReach has access to it. That's not fair. We need that to be open, exactly as Michael I think was saying. We need Tom Barn anyway. We need access, real commercially viable access to those dark fibres. I think could be a game changer. Where have we got to? First of all, Mike, have you anything to say on this sort of issue?
I'd throw in two sort of tangential comments, okay? So one is my biggest I've got two big frustrations with BT UK. One is I think with the superfast programmes they were perhaps too localised, but I think they've gone too centralised, although I have to say in the last sort of year, 18 months, we've seen far better coordination between BT UK, the local council and the local altnets, and I think that's really paid dividends. And in Northumberland we're certainly seeing the voucher programme back in place, which for smaller companies, for the reasons Ben's pointed out, it's far easier to navigate the project gigabit bid. But I think the other frustration with BT UK all comes down to the quality of the data. You might have seen an ISP review this morning, Quickline have been through some change requests, and I think one of their contracts was a huge change. A number of properties being de-scoped, a number of properties being re-scoped. And if you're planning a network, you want a decent data set from the start. Now we all know this data is hard to get right, you'll never get it perfect. But I'd like to see a lot more focus on a better data set, better planning, better economics, better deployment.
Just re-released UBRNs like last week.
Yeah.
Any more questions?
If I just come in on Paddy's point, the question I think posed was if we're going to reach the sand in between the pebbles, then what's the intervention that gets us there, and do we need some new thinking from BTUK in terms of that intervention? I mean, if I can give my perspective, which is we have it, and it's the voucher scheme. The challenge we are facing is that you have lots of small properties, individual properties, and they aren't currently commercially viable. And so what you need is a scheme that enables you to target individual properties and make them commercially viable by giving a certain amount, however much money it takes to make them cross that threshold. And the voucher scheme is exactly that. It can be targeted, it is individual, you can focus in on the properties that really need it, and that money, you only get it not only if that property is connected, but there is someone in that property taking service, so it is absolutely demand-led. So I think actually the voucher scheme hopefully will become more and more prominent as we try and sweep up the sand in between the pebbles, because all you need to do is keep turning that dial up until these properties become into that realm of commercial viability.
Because I think the thing about Barn was very much in that sort of Chris Condor model of you've got to go for everyone. Flog James and go for everybody. That was basically what her sort of idea was. Now, most operators, of course, didn't take that model. So what we need now is an intervention that can take the model that has gone to sort of feed the sort of the towns and miss the bits in the middle, and kind of like almost post-rationalise that back to, and how this is how we're going to get the bits. How do you?
I was just going to say, I mean, vouchers is great, but way too complex just to get. They made it as hard as possible and as many hoops to jump as possible. It seemed to be.
It's a lot less complex than a gigabit contract, that's for sure.
It has its moment. We did quite well on the Isle of Wight with it. So,
I mean, cumulatively, I would. If you're doing 1,000 vouchers, there's probably more work than, I don't.
Yeah. Adrian.
Why aren't we talking about copper switch off? If everybody that hasn't got a fibre is going to have to migrate, then suddenly you're creating 100% demand, not 30, 40 or 50% demand. Isn't that the way to do this?
Yeah, it's an interesting. Sorry.
Yeah, go.
It's an interesting one because it also goes back to the point you mentioned earlier, James, about the speed of service not being enough, and then that's going to generate the demand. And then if all the networks aren't going to be ready, it's going to be a bun fight, right? That's another aspect, is that the copper lines will be switched off. For example, we've created a voice product now, so then we can migrate people over as we're connecting people, so that problem goes away, but only for the areas that we're deploying. I think you're right, that's going to be another driver that is going to force us to do it, right? It's going to be the speed is one, and then content is another, and telephone switch off is another. Are we going to be ready?
It's another one of those ones where we need to be careful what we wish for, because an easy way of doing that, conceptually, it might be, let's go for one big national operator who can take all that problem away for us and do it for the whole country, which might not necessarily be in our best interest.
Did anybody read Richard Veaz's article on LinkedIn in the last week or so?
Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant on exactly that topic, that there's equivalency in BT across so many aspects of what they do, but not in where they switch their telephone networks off. And that needs to be introduced, and he was encouraging Berwick on a pan-European basis to look at this.
Yeah, I think it's a hugely important, and it kind of that my sort of demand model, whereby sort of the bandwidth creeps up, and so it's not available. Everyone finds that their broadband's not good enough, so you get that latent demand starts to develop. It's not the most important thing. The most important thing is it switches over to the point that the ISPs thinks, I can't be bothered with this multiple technology, let's migrate everyone over onto full fibre. That will happen at some point relatively soon, and that's what will drive it. Now that gets back to the second big challenge that I think we can see. Ben, you were talking about you've got good demand. You're getting up to 40% demand, and you're sort of churning over quite a significant number.
Anticipating 40%, we've
Oh,
got 20%.
yeah, okay. I mean, 40%, and where you are, we can get to the exact numbers. That actually really is good going. It means that effectively they're the sort of the primary operator in a lot of the areas where they go to. Everybody else is playing sort of second fiddle to. This is really encouraging. Relatively soon, you're going to get a lot more. That demand is going to pick up, and you've got to get that capacity to go out and meet the demand, or you'll be too late. So what from I see in the broadband market,
coverage, or do you mean?
I mean the actual ability to go and connect them. When the demand says, "Oh yeah, we want it," you've got to be able to step up that ability to go out and connect them up, or somebody else will. And that it's going to be one of those very different sort of challenges that we sort of face. That's where kind of like you and Clement may need to have thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, we already had 1,000 customers a month. The demand is growing, but I think it grows in a kind of a fairly predictable way. The demand still is largely created through us through our marketing campaigns, through knocking on doors and through all of the outreach stuff we do. So I don't see that suddenly the phones are going to ring off the hook. I think it's quite a gradual process, and you have quite a lot of control over the demand. You can anticipate it growing. And building the installation capability wherever you need to meet that demand. But fundamentally, we built our networks for very, very high levels of coverage and penetration. Right? So the network's built, the backhall's scaled, the links to Manchester and London, they're all scaled. So, we're ready for that demand.
I say this because
staffing up to satisfy the demand that you can largely create or moderate through your activities, I would say.
I say this because I've been working with another altnet down in the southwest, shall we say, farming based. And looking at their ability to meet the demand to connect, and so because they're operating a couple of BDUK contracts, they've got to meet that demand, and so suddenly they've got this massive ramp up, and they've had to work out how are we going to find all these contractors and people, because they're mostly in-house delivery. How are we going to actually meet that demand? All the altnets are going to face that relatively soon. How are we going to meet this demand to connect them up?
I think it was actually harder 18 months ago when the industry was awash with money. And people were building like Billio and trying to connect like Billio. Actually, they had a lot more challenges as organisations to grow. In fact, many organisations have already scaled, and actually the big problem now is a lack of capital. So actually, many organisations face a slightly different problem. So I don't think for many of the mature altnets, I don't really see it as a big problem. For those people who built wholesale networks, who suddenly realised they needed to go and find some customers, who now have tried to build a brand belatedly and tried to build an ISP belatedly, and now have got to go out and rush and find customers, they do have a big challenge scaling up the acquisition side of their business. But for those operators who went out there from the front gate, said, we're going to be a provider, a service provider, and get customers on, because that's what make our economics work, I don't think we have such a problem, frankly.
I just realised we missed a huge opportunity to have a wholesale player on the panel. It would have been so much more fun, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Any more questions? Yeah.
So I know we've spoken about the last mile. I was kind of one of the issues I'm facing at the moment is more the last sort of 200-300 metres. So when we're facing a lot of privately owned land, we see examples quite regularly where we've got maybe 10 to 12 properties down a private track. We've taken our network to the public point, and there's interest down there. So let's say 5 or 6 of the people are interested in the service and willing to allow us to go ahead. The other half are not. So we have an inability to complete the rest of the network in order to serve them. Now, essentially we've covered those homes. We can serve them, but we're having blockers due to private ownership, and we can't get them connected. So until everybody's accepted that kind of allowing us to go down there and dig up the road or whatever we need to do, we're at a bit of a kind of a difficult point.
Where are you from?
So Venice. So we cover national, but my specific area is down in the southwest.
Okay.
So a lot of private.
Go on, Tom.
I was going to say, you're probably going to come to me for this one, aren't you?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, story of my life. I mean, ultimately, you've got to involve the community, because the community are the ones who are going to unlock that for you. There's no way I could go down and knock on that farmer's door and say, could you just, come and let us across? No chance. So, really what you've got to do is, go to that whole collective community area. It might be 12 properties, you say, 6 want and 6 don't. And you've got to talk to the people who don't want it. You've got to talk to them all and say, look, this is for the benefit of the community. So we'd like to run the cable down, and we'd like to connect the people. We've got waileys from people who haven't taken the service. We've got waileys where they've said, yeah, sure, okay, I get it. It's for the good of the community. I don't really understand the internet, I'm not there yet, but I understand it's for the good of the community. So we'll go and dig it, and we'll go and connect those people who want it. And then years later, guess what? The people who didn't want it then sign up.
Yeah.
Right? So yeah, it's a challenge. It's just a challenge that you will face in rural deployments.
Yeah. I think it is also one of the, in a sense, the opportunities of a rural deployment, because in a rural deployment you have that sense of community. So I knew whoever I was going to on this panel, they would say you've got to engage the community.
Yeah. And that's been a big theme today, clearly. And I think we can always do more of that, but there are unfortunately going to be examples where one person is not willing to sign.
You can always take the public flogging answer.
Yeah, and there are, and sometimes we've ended up truncating the edge of our network either for way leaves or people don't want poles in the housing estate, and that's fine, we'll just stay here. When you change your mind, let us know, we'll come back. Yeah. The other thing I'd say is, I'd completely agree with Tom's answer, but you've got to put a huge amount of effort into stakeholder management as well, so whether it's the major landowners, National Trust, the CLA, the NFU or so on, you've got to really get embedded in that overall kind of community, from Billy Bloggs who owns one parcel of land to Lord whoever who owns half the county. It's very, very, very time intensive.
We have a big problem with housing associations. Right? There's a lot of social housing in Wales. There are 30 housing associations across South Wales. Each one of them may have 5, 6, 10,000 premises under their control. We'll go and build a town and actually don't have access to 1,500 of the properties because they're all under a housing association. So similar sort of problems, right? So I would agree with Mike. You've got to build those relationships from the executive level down to try and get some advocacy, because ultimately the housing associations, they're struggling with so many operators knocking on their doors, and they don't know which way to go a lot of the time. So,
but they need one of them.
Yeah. It's a big problem. It's so easy just to say, well, OpenReach does it, and we don't need any more.
And so it's similar to what Helen was saying earlier, local people knocking local doors. Don't send me to Northumberland to do it, it'll fail.
Yeah. And if I may, one last question, or more of a point to raise. One of the other issues we faced, even though we're in a kind of a partnership now with National Grid, trying to use dual user poles tends to be an absolute nightmare. And for me, the only way it would work well is if it kind of followed the same rules as BIA. It has to a point where you can apply and then get a response if it falls within certain criteria. But what tends to happen is you apply for 20 poles, it comes back and you can use 3 of them. It just makes the whole thing a waste of time. Yeah. And I was out with the team last week, and we had a perfect example where we served the left-hand side of the street because it was all there was a footpath and we'd done toby boxes all down there. On the right-hand side of the street, the edge of the property was all carriageway, quite high walls, all currently served by job user poles. We couldn't include that in our bill because we couldn't access them. So until that's delivered by somebody else, there's blockers there, and I think that's one of the big ones for me. That's big.
My company's just been going 20 years this year, and for most of that time I've been saying I want to come to one of these meetings where no one mentions wayleaves and bloody giant user poles.
You're chairing.
You like the job.
Shut it down.
No. Any more? Clement, in terms of this issue about how do you ramp up the delivery the connectivity, because I mean one of the things, if you're going out there as an altnet and you are engaging the company particularly during your build phase, then you've got the sort of the marketing of your build, and so you're going to potentially get a sort of significant cohort all coming on in a reasonable time, relatively easy to manage. After that, it gets to be much more dribs and drabs of people coming to you as the demand builds up. Is there anything in terms of sort of solutions that might help in terms of that?
I wouldn't give you any perfect solution, because today what we see is that almost every case is different. Clearly, the best thing we can do as a manufacturer is be as close as possible to the actual operator, so that when they know something is coming, they can give us as much as a heads up as they can. But it's very difficult, and what we see today in the market is that people are using different cables with different type of connectors, different lengths, and especially for rural. Until you have the customer signing up, you don't know if you will need 100 meters cable, 200, 300. And this, unfortunately, there aren't 10,000 solutions. So based on what we see in the market and other customers, we do averages on, okay, these lengths are the most common ones for people who are more in very rural or semi-urban or things like that. And otherwise, it's working very closely with our customers, working very closely with production, so that we can reduce the lead time as much as possible. Because that's the thing, as soon as your customers sign, obviously you need to connect them quickly if you don't want to get penalties. So it's really having very close relation and a lot of communication and a buffer stock of what we can, and we can always find solution. We might not have the perfect lengths that you need during the installation, but then there are ways around it to manage overlengths or to do things a bit differently. So sometimes you need to bring additional accessories or a bit of new ideas to make it work. But yeah, you can always find a solution as long as, again, a lot of communication, and our salespeople are very close to the customers.
We're running out of time, but we've got a couple of issues I'd like to. Consolidation then. Everyone talks about this being, sort of consolidation as being the next sort of big thing, and is that going to be something that really does affect the rural areas in the last sort of few percent of the rural areas? Because I kind of have to admit, no, I won't give my view.
Good night. I'll tell you. I was speaking to somebody the other day who's spent his career building networks, and his adage was, you want to build local and operate national. I think there's a hell of a lot of sense in that. A lot of what you've heard out today, the local relationships, knowledge of local community, all of that, huge advantages you come to build the network. Once you come to operate the network, there's a totally different economy of scale if you're doing it regionally or nationally. I think the hard bit is what's going to drive us through the process, and at the moment, as Ben's alluded to, there's a funding drought out there, and a lot of the drive for consolidation is because people are looking for funds or cost synergy. I don't think that operates the same way in the rural area, but ultimately over time I would imagine a number of rural operators either acquire or become acquirers.
Right, hold that thought. Ben, what is your Trustpilot score?
4.5.
4.5. Tom, what is your Trustpilot score?
Probably quite similar, but not very many people actually bother to write up. But there you go.
Wessex, what is their Trustpilot score about? 4.5.
We're on 4.9.
4.9. Paddy, yours? 4.2. Yeah. Okay. What do you think the Trustpilot scores of the big national operators is?
About
2.
1.2.
Yeah. If you, as a local operator, had a Trustpilot score of about 2, how long would you last?
Yeah, not very.
long.
I mean, it's all about customer experience, right?
Yeah.
And I don't just mean what it's like when they pick up the phone to the call centre, it's all aspects of our customer experience. What we're like in the community, what we like to deal with, what we're like as an employer, given that employers are also customers, so it's a whole basket of stuff there that goes into that.
But do you think you could maintain that with a national operation?
I think it's highly likely that these things get diluted as you reach scale, right? Because the business priority moves away from the Abergavennies and it moves to bigger issues, and I think it is highly likely you'll see that number go down. However, there are large companies out there that manage to maintain high Trustpilot scores, but I think the way of consolidation, looking for often cost synergies more than they're looking necessarily for the other synergies that drive more revenue. They're looking for cost synergies often dries out the very goodness and the very localness that's made us special. So I think it's highly likely that
Tom, Michael,
we
anything
see that
to say on
diluted.
that?
I mean, our view is probably going to be quite biased because of the way, you know, we operate the business. But I mean, ultimately, you're right that the size that we are able to have a really high customer experience and engagement with the community. You know, we've not built to sell. You know, we've built to serve those communities. And as I said earlier, it's not just about the broadband piece. What's exciting for us is what comes after that. You know, some of those doors haven't been opened yet. You know, digital inclusion is absolutely massive right now. You've got this new technology that's out there. How are you going to work with the communities for them to adopt it? And I'm talking silly things like car parking meters or electric car charging and getting, you know, your solar panels to sync up with your car charger to sync up with the actual car. It's all that sort of stuff.
Well,
that's
Open
coming,
Meters don't
right?
do
It's all coming.
Open
How
Meters
can you
don't
do that
do
nationally?
EV charging, weren't they? They did one and then abandoned it.
Yeah, well, but you know, the point is, I don't, in the rural space, yes, okay, some will probably be, you know, consolidated, but actually, by and large, I think most of them will stay because of that local link and the fact that it isn't just the broadband. Actually, it'll come that the broadband's just the enabler, and it's everything else that's going to count. Does that make sense?
I personally, to me, that makes complete sense, and I think you're absolutely right. But time will tell. We can't find that out. Since you're here, Barry. I mean, you know, okay. So Chris asked me to be sort of publicly flogged. The other interesting one was Barry. Barry Ford always said the ISP is dead. There is no need for ISPs anymore. People can just go on to open internet and choose the services they want. So, you know, broadband is, from the national operators, is all about quad play, value add, and all those other things. What do you think? Are we still the ISP is dead? We just want open internet, or is that value add?
Trust Barry.
Or is that value add still going to be there?
Yeah, no, I think for us, you know, we've created a trusted brand in the community that we operate, and we've chosen to be our own ISP, vertically integrated. We do absolutely everything, and we've chosen to do our own backhaul. We've chosen to put the product out as it is, and the support that we've put on it. You know, and that's a big part of the business. You know, people attach to that. They attach to the brand and what you do, and your service has just got to work properly. It really, really has. So for us, that's part of our operation in those communities, rather than it being, you know, you can just choose whoever you want or whatever it is. I think it's a big part of it, the operations.
Yeah, I think ultimately our brand has got purpose. It speaks to our audience. It provides certain promises, and I think people buy into it and buy into what you stand for and what you're trying to do. And you know, there are lots of aspects to that, but yeah, it's a big part of us, and I don't see us giving it up. And I think again with the consolidation argument, you know, do I think that TalkTalk would make as much headway in Wales as Oggy can? No, I don't. So I think there's a lot about what we built behind the brand, the trust, the purpose about the brand that matters. So I think it's here to stay personally. But time will tell.
Okay. Is that about lunchtime, do you think?
It is at lunchtime.
It has been designated lunchtime.
Thank you to the panel. Thank you very much.